The end of Operation Citadel did not come only from burning tanks or exhausted infantry at the front. It also came from command rooms, reports, arguments, and the sudden intrusion of the wider war into Hitler's headquarters. By mid-July 1943, the German attack at Kursk had failed to produce the rapid encirclement it required. In the north, Model's offensive had been ground down. In the south, Manstein's forces had advanced farther, but not far enough to make the double envelopment work. Then, as the battle reached its crisis, the Allies landed in Sicily, threatening Germany's position in the Mediterranean and the survival of fascist Italy. Citadel was dying at the front, but its formal death came when battlefield reality and strategic crisis collided.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore.
Hitler had launched Citadel as a limited offensive with large ambitions. The plan was to cut off the Kursk salient, destroy Soviet forces inside it, shorten the German line, and prove that the Wehrmacht could still shape the Eastern Front after Stalingrad. That plan depended on speed, surprise, and the ability to turn penetration into encirclement. By the time Hitler reconsidered the operation, those conditions were gone. The Soviets had expected the attack. Their defensive belts had absorbed German blows. The northern pincer had failed to break through. The southern pincer had fought hard and advanced, but it was increasingly alone in operational terms. A pincer with one stalled arm cannot close a trap.
The Allied landing in Sicily on the 10th of July added a new pressure that could not be ignored. Sicily was not near Kursk, but modern war connects distant theaters through reserves, aircraft, shipping, political confidence, and strategic attention. Italy was Germany's major ally in the Mediterranean, and its vulnerability threatened the entire southern flank of Hitler's Europe. If Italy collapsed or had to be reinforced heavily, Germany would need mobile formations, aircraft, and command focus elsewhere. This did not mean Sicily alone stopped the German offensive at Kursk, although that explanation has often been repeated because it is simple. The truth is more complicated. Sicily mattered because Citadel was already failing to achieve its purpose, and now Germany faced another emergency it could not postpone.
On 13 July, Hitler met with senior commanders, including Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, responsible for Army Group Center, and Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, commanding Army Group South. Their situations were different. Kluge's northern forces had been stopped and were now threatened by the Soviet Operation Kutuzov against the Orel salient. For him, continuing Citadel in the north no longer made sense. The forces there were needed to defend against the widening Soviet counteroffensive. Manstein saw the southern battle differently. He believed his forces still had an opportunity to hurt Soviet reserves and perhaps salvage something from the offensive. The disagreement reflected the uneven nature of the battle itself. The north had already failed, while the south still seemed to offer possibilities, though not the original victory. Hitler's problem was that possibilities were not enough. Operation Citadel had not been designed as a local attritional fight in the south. It had been designed as a double envelopment that would destroy Soviet forces inside the salient. Once the northern arm stalled and the Soviets attacked around Orel, the structure of the operation was broken. Even if Manstein could continue fighting and inflict losses, the campaign's original purpose was slipping away. This is one of the hardest distinctions in military history. A commander at the front may see tactical opportunities that are real, but the head of state must decide whether those opportunities still serve a strategic purpose. At Kursk, the answer was increasingly no. The decision to call off Citadel was not a single clean switch that instantly ended every fight. The northern offensive had effectively ended because it had no realistic path forward. In the south, limited operations continued briefly as German commanders tried to improve positions, damage Soviet forces, or extract some meaning from the effort already spent. This messy ending matters because campaigns rarely stop like machines when a lever is pulled. Orders move through headquarters, commanders interpret them, local attacks continue, and units already engaged must disengage under pressure. Citadel died in stages, first in the minefields and belts, then in the failure of the northern pincer, then in the widening Soviet counteroffensives, and finally in the command decision that accepted the offensive could not deliver what it had promised.
Manstein later argued that he might have achieved more had he been allowed to continue in the South, and that argument has shaped much post-war debate. It should be taken seriously, but not swallowed whole. German forces in the South remained tactically formidable and could still inflict severe losses, but they were not operating in a vacuum. They faced deep Soviet reserves, a failing northern situation, the Soviet attack on Orel, and a strategic crisis in the Mediterranean. Continuing the southern push might have produced further local success or damaged additional Soviet formations. It is much less clear that it could have restored the double envelopment or changed the strategic direction of the Eastern Front. Tactical promise is not the same as operational salvation.
Cluj's situation made the decision even clearer from the perspective of Army Group Center. The Soviet Kutuzov offensive threatened the Oral salient, a German-held bulge north of Kursk that had to be defended or abandoned. Forces that had been committed to Citadel now faced the possibility of being needed in a defensive emergency. The Germans could not pretend that the front was still organized around their chosen offensive. The Soviets had taken control of the timetable. When an army begins an operation to force the enemy to react and then finds itself reacting instead, the initiative has shifted. This was the deeper meaning of Hitler calling it off. Germany had attacked to regain control, and the result was a front where Germany had to answer Soviet moves.
The Sicily factor also reveals the limits of German strategic resources in 1943. Earlier in the war, Germany had often concentrated strength at decisive points and relied on speed to compensate for broader weaknesses. By mid-1943, the war had become too wide and too demanding for that method to work reliably. The Eastern Front consumed men and machines at a staggering rate. The Mediterranean now demanded urgent attention. The air war over Germany was intensifying. Occupied Europe required garrisons and mobile reserves. A tank division was not just a battlefield formation, it was a strategic asset that might be needed in several places at once. Citadel failed partly because Germany could no longer afford to spend elite armored strength without a high probability of decisive return. For the soldiers at the front, the command decision did not mean immediate relief. German units had to hold ground, withdraw from exposed positions, recover damaged vehicles where possible, and prepare for Soviet pressure. Soviet troops, meanwhile, continued fighting, advancing, and counterattacking as the broader campaign shifted in their favor. The suffering did not stop because Hitler reconsidered priorities. Men still died in fields, villages, ridges, and road junctions, while headquarters language changed from offensive ambition to defensive necessity. This is why the end of Citadel should not be treated as a tidy administrative moment. The decision mattered enormously, but it was imposed on a battlefield still full of violence, confusion, and unfinished local struggles. The end of the offensive also marked a psychological change. Germany had entered Kursk hoping to prove that it could still impose major decisions in the east. Calling off Citadel acknowledged, whether Hitler wished to admit it or not, that the attempt had failed. The Wehrmacht could still fight effectively, and it would continue to do so for a long time. It could counterattack, defend skillfully, and inflict terrible losses. But after Kursk, it no longer had the same ability to launch great offensive solutions on the Eastern Front. The war in the East was becoming a story of Soviet initiatives and German responses. That shift did not happen in one sentence at a conference table, but the decision to end Citadel made it visible. In the history of armored warfare, Hitler calling off Citadel teaches that armored campaigns are judged by strategic effect, not by isolated feats of tactical performance. German tanks and crews had fought hard. Some German formations had advanced deeply and destroyed large numbers of Soviet vehicles. Yet the offensive failed because it did not create the operational decision it required, and because the wider war made continued effort too costly and too uncertain. Tanks can win firefights and still lose campaigns if the plan around them collapses. Mechanized warfare depends on timing, reserves, enemy reaction, political context, and the ability to exploit success before the strategic situation changes. At Kursk, that window closed.
Hitler's decision did not end the Kursk campaign. It changed its direction. The Soviet counteroffensives were now expanding, and German commanders had to shift from trying to pinch off the Kursk salient to trying to preserve their own front under growing pressure. The drama of this episode lies in that reversal. A campaign planned as the restoration of German initiative became evidence that the initiative had passed away. Citadel died in the minefields, in the stalled northern attack, in the costly southern advance, in the Soviet reserves moving forward, in Kutuzov widening the front, and in Sicily reminding Hitler that Germany was now fighting too many crises at once. When Hitler called it off, he was not simply ending an operation, he was acknowledging a new reality. Germany could still resist, but it could no longer command the war in the East.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.